Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a quick look at the Races and Classes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This will be a stepping stone for us when we go to making our first D&D characters. Let's get started. So to start off, let's talk about the different races. Now, in D&D, there are the typical races that you would see in any fantasy thing like dwarves and elves and humans and halflings. But we also have things like half-orcs and tieflings and dragonborn that are pretty cool as well. So let's take a look at each race individually. Now the first race I want to take a look at are dwarves. Dwarves are very stout and hardy. They are on the shorter side, and they tend to be a little bit broader, but they are incredibly resilient and they are crafty, very crafty with their hands. There are two kinds of dwarves in Dungeons & Dragons. There are the hill dwarves and then there are the mountain dwarves. When we talk about elves are very much the opposite of dwarves. Elves are very tall and slender. They're very much in tune with nature and they're very aloof and mysterious. There are three kinds of elves in Dungeons & Dragons. There are the high elf, the wood elf, and the dark elf, also called drow. When we talk about humans, humans are a very versatile species in Dungeons & Dragons. There are so many ethnicities. You can make humans any kind of ethnicities that you can think of and imagine. And because of their really short lifespan, they tend to grab life by the horns and run with it. They are very ambitious. They really try to make their mark on the world so that they don't be forgotten. When we talk about halflings are very small and nimble, and they like the simple things in life. Food, drink, times with family, but they can go out and do adventures too. They're very nimble and very quick and dexterous, and they're also particularly lucky. There are two kinds of halflings in Dungeons & Dragons. There are the lightfoot halflings and the stout halflings. So now let's go into the less common races in Dungeons & Dragons. We'll start off with the dragonborn. Now, a dragonborn is a humanoid type creature that has dragon characteristics. So they're scaly, they have a snout, they have breath weapon of different varieties. They're basically a combination of dragons and humans. They do not have a tail traditionally, although you can make one with a tail if you really want to, and they also do not have wings. Dragonborns come in different colors. You can have the metallic dragonborn, like gold, silver, bronze, copper, or you can have the chromatic kind, like white, black, red, blue, green. And they all have different breath weapons. When we talk about the gnome is a very witty and clever race. They're on the smaller side as well, and they are just full of life. Their exuberance kind of permeates everything that they do. They're extremely good at tinkering as well. There are two kinds of gnomes in Dungeons & Dragons. There is the forest gnome, and then there is the rock gnome. Next, I want to talk about the half-elves. So the half-elves are a very interesting race because they don't really belong in the world of the elves, and they don't really belong in the world of the humans because they are essentially a hybrid of the two. Elves see them as kind of lesser beings, and then humans kind of see them as, different from everyone else. So half-elves, they have to kind of combat a lot of these internal biases and discriminations. So they tend to be very charismatic peoples. Half-elves share different characteristics from the elves and humans. On the elf side, they're pretty close in nature, and they have that deep connection with the world itself. Whereas with the human side, they have this insatiable curiosity and ambition to make their mark on the world. Next, I want to talk about tieflings. Tieflings are humanoid, meaning that they look human, but they have demonic ancestry that shows up in their physical appearance, whether they have horns, tail, a weird skin color, or cat slit for eyes. Tieflings are often the outcasts because of these demonic features. Their ancestor or their parent or somebody in their bloodline once made a deal with a demon, and because of that deal, they have now been born as a tiefling. So they're often seen as bad people, even if they're not necessarily bad. So because of this, tieflings are very self-reliant and they're very independent, and it makes them an interesting character to play at a table. The last but not least of all the races is the half-orc. Now the half-orc is very strong, burly, and intimidating. They are half-orc and half-human. Half-orcs have a knack for fighting, and they also take joy in the simple pleasures, such as feasting and fighting and drinking and laughing and telling jokes and just enjoying life itself. They are also very prideful, and they have strong clan ties. Now when we talk about the different classes in Dungeons & Dragons, we can separate them into two broad categories. You can have the warriors, or you can have the spellcasters. So let's take a look at some of the warrior classes. The first one is the barbarian. The barbarian is a very strong type of character. They tend to not wear armor, and they tend to do really well with two-weapon fighting. They don't tend to carry shields or anything like that. Oftentimes they come from the wildlands where they've lived amongst nature, and they know how to survive really well. Next we have the fighter. The fighter has been trained in all manner of different fighting skills. The fighter is adept at all kinds of martial weapons as well as armor. Now the fighter can actually specialize in certain fighting styles. So you can decide if you wanted to do dual wielding, or if you wanted to do archery or anything like that with a fighter. Then you have the monk. The monk is a martial artist, and they have trained with the monks of the monastery to channel their inner ki. And they can use their ki to land stunning strikes and run faster than the wind and that kind of stuff. Monks are pretty cool to play, especially if you want to do something that is on the martial arts edge of things. Next we have the paladin. The paladin is a holy champion that upholds justice and righteousness. They can channel the power, the divine power of the gods when they are in battle or out of battle. These types of characters tend to be very strong and charismatic. Next we have the ranger. The ranger is a warrior that is very skilled in hunting, tracking, and defending the edges of society from all kinds of monsters and creatures and that kind of stuff. They are very in tune with nature, and due to their connection with nature, they actually do have access to some spellcasting abilities. And last but certainly not least in the warrior category, we have the rogue. The rogue is sly, cunning, sometimes sneaky, can be sometimes deceptive. It really depends on how you build your rogue. But they're the ones that rely on what we call sneak attack in battle. They're also very good at finding and disarming traps. Again, if you build them that way. And they can also be very good at being deceptive and lying and impersonating other people. They're essentially the spies, the assassins of Dungeons & Dragons. Let's move on to our spellcasters in Dungeons & Dragons. The first one is the Bard. Now, the Bard is a spellcaster that uses the magic of song and word to inspire people and to cast spells. They are very versatile, and they are very skilled as, you would think a Bard would be. Because of their ability to inspire people with their words and their song, they are very charismatic, they're very energetic and inspirational. Next we have the cleric. Now, the cleric uses divine energy. Think of them as kind of like a priest, but a warrior priest, kind of. They channel divine energy, and they're often used as healers, but you can also have warrior clerics that specialize in battle damage, essentially. They are extremely powerful against undead, and as characters, they are very wise characters that often advise the parties on what the right thing to do is and what the wrong thing to do is. Next, we have the druid. The druid is able to harness power from the natural world. They can control all kinds of environmental things such as lightning, wind, earthquakes, and water. They also have the special skill called Wild Shape, where they can transform into any kind of beast or creature, provided at a certain level. They also are able to control elemental and fey creatures at certain levels once you reach those. Next, we have the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer is someone that was born with an innate ability to do magic. And this innate ability can either come from the wild magic of the world, or it could come from some kind of ancestry that they have, whether it is dragon or phoenix or something like that. Sorcerers are very charismatic people as well, and that is what they use when they are casting their spells. Next, we have the Warlock. So the Warlock is an interesting spellcaster because they're also kind of a melee character, or a warrior, essentially. Warlocks have made a pact with some otherworldly deity or god or being, and that's where their power comes from. They're very comfortable with hand-to-hand combat, so they're able to use weapons, simple weapons, and they're also able to use simple armor. Warlocks are often driven by their ambitions and their goals. Very rarely will you have a warlock where they do not have a goal in mind. They've sought out the power of this entity. That's why they made a deal with it. So warlocks tend to be very goal-driven. And last but not least, we have the Wizard. Now, the Wizard is a traditional, something that we're used to. They have this insane thirst for knowledge, and they study really hard to be able to cast the magic spells that they do. This is the typical one where they would have a textbook, they'd have a spell book, they might have a wand, they might use some components, they might make some potions, that kind of stuff. Now, the thing with wizards is that they absolutely have to have their spell book on hand for them to cast magic. Otherwise, they can't use their magic. And that's all for the races and classes in the Dungeons & Dragons Player Handbook 5th edition. There are, of course, many more races and classes that you can explore, but for now, we'll start off with these ones. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time.